You're bleeding. A deep gash runs across your forearm, dirt already working its way into the wound. No pharmacy down the street, no antibiotics in a cabinet, no sterile bandage wrapped in plastic. For most of human history, this single injury could kill you. Not in some dramatic, instant way, slowly, over days, as the wound swelled, as the skin around it turned hot and tight, as infection spread further than any blade ever could. So, what did your ancestors actually do? How did anyone survive long enough to pass on the genes that became you? The answer is stranger and smarter than most people expect. Start in northern Iraq in a limestone cave called Shanidar. In the 1950s, archaeologist Ralph Solecki uncovered a set of Neanderthal skeletons there, and one of them changed how scientists understood ancient medicine forever. The skeleton is known as Shanidar I. This man lived roughly 45,000 years ago. He was missing most of his right forearm. His right eye socket showed signs of blindness. His hearing was likely damaged, and yet the bone around his amputated arm had fully healed. Healed bone takes time, weeks, months, sometimes years. That means this man did not die from his injuries. He lived with them for years in a hunter-gatherer band where every member needed to contribute to survive. Anthropologist Eric Trinkos, who spent decades studying Neanderthal remains, including Shanidar I, argued that an injury this severe could not heal without help. Someone fed him when he couldn't hunt. Someone protected him when he couldn't fight. Someone at some point likely packed his wound, kept it from rotting, and waited. This wasn't an isolated case, it was a pattern. Across the ancient world, skeletal remains keep telling the same story: healed fractures, healed amputations, healed skull injuries. Survival wasn't accidental. It was the result of something ancient humans understood, sometimes without writing a single word about it. Wound care wasn't a modern invention. It was older than agriculture, older than cities, older possibly than language itself. But healing wasn't only about herbs and bandages. Sometimes it meant cutting into the body on purpose. Travel forward and across the ocean to ancient Peru, and you'll find one of the strangest medical practices in human history: trepanation, the deliberate act of drilling, scraping, or cutting a hole into a living person's skull. It sounds like something designed to kill. For a long time, archaeologists assumed exactly that. Then researcher John Verano spent years examining hundreds of trepanned skulls from Peru, dating from roughly 400 BCE through the era of the Inca Empire. What he found upended the assumption. In the earliest periods, survival rates were low, maybe 40%. But by the time of the Inca, centuries later, survival rates climbed above 80%. Bone around the surgical openings showed clear signs of healing. People were surviving skull surgery, sometimes multiple times. Why would anyone do this on purpose? Most cases line up with head trauma, often from warfare or accidents, the kind that causes swelling and dangerous pressure inside the skull. Trepanation, brutal as it sounds, may have relieved that pressure. Over centuries, ancient surgeons refined their technique, learned which tools caused less damage, learned how long a procedure could safely take. This was trial and error spanning generations, written not in books but in bone. And while some healers were cutting, others were watching nature do the work for them. Consider the maggot. To modernize, maggots in a wound look like the worst possible outcome, a sign that infection has completely taken over. But across multiple ancient and traditional cultures, including some Aboriginal Australian communities and groups across the Americas, maggots were sometimes welcomed rather than removed. Here's why. Maggots eat dead tissue and only dead tissue. They leave healthy flesh alone. By consuming the rotting parts of a wound, they could slow the spread of infection, a process modern medicine eventually gave a clinical name, debridement, which simply means clearing away dead or damaged tissue so healthy tissue can take over. What looked like horror was, in some cases, an early form of triage. Honey tells a similar story. The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical text dating to around 1550 BCE, lists honey repeatedly as a wound treatment, often mixed with grease and plant fiber and packed directly onto injuries. At the time, no one understood bacteria. No one had a microscope. But honey is naturally low in moisture and slightly acidic, which makes it inhospitable to many of the microorganisms that cause infection. Ancient healers couldn't explain why it worked. They simply noticed, generation after generation, that wounds treated this way did better than wounds left alone. Even mold made an appearance, long before anyone had heard the word penicillin. Ancient Egyptian and Greek texts both describe applying moldy bread directly to wounds and skin infections. Centuries later, scientists would discover that certain molds produce compounds that kill bacteria. Ancient healers had no concept of microorganisms. What they had was observation, repeated patiently across countless wounded bodies long before anyone understood the mechanism behind it. So picture it. Picture a small fire burning at the edge of a hunter-gatherer camp. Tens of thousands of years ago, a man returns from a hunt with a deep cut along his thigh, torn open by an antler or a misplaced stone tool. An older woman, someone who has packed dozens of wounds before him, presses a paste of crushed plants and animal fat against the cut. She may use spider silk, which Roman and Greek writers later described as a way to help close small wounds. Its fine threads acting almost like primitive stitches. She wraps it in leaves or hide. She watches him over the following days, checking for heat, for swelling, for the smell that means infection has won. This wasn't guesswork performed once. It was knowledge passed down, tested against real consequences, refined across thousands of lifetimes. That's the counterintuitive twist hiding inside all of this. Ancient wound care wasn't primitive ignorance stumbling in the dark. It was an early, brutally tested form of science. Every method that didn't work got someone killed and disappeared from the knowledge passed down. Every method that did work got repeated, refined, and carried forward. Natural selection wasn't only shaping bodies, it was shaping medical knowledge itself, generation by painful generation. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. Some of these primitive techniques never actually left medicine, they just got rebranded. Maggot debridement therapy is FDA cleared and still used today in hospitals to clean wounds that won't heal with standard treatment, particularly diabetic ulcers and other stubborn infections. Medical grade honey dressings sit on hospital supply shelves right now, used specifically for their antibacterial properties. Even leeches used historically across many cultures for bloodletting are used today in modern reconstructive surgery to improve blood flow after certain procedures. The ancient and the modern aren't as far apart as the doodles in a history textbook make them look. So the next time you get a small cut and you barely think about it and you slap on a bandage from a box and move on with your day, remember what that same injury once meant. It meant someone watching over you. It meant tested knowledge passed hand to hand across thousands of years. It meant the accumulated trial and error of every healer who came before, encoded not in textbooks but in survival itself. You're bleeding again, but this time you don't think twice.